This is a message to all my supporters of this podcast. I'm introducing a new supporters program. You can contribute a small amount as a one-off payment to show your love for this podcast. Thank you in advance for all your contributions. I just wanted to let you know before we start the podcast that I am doing an online podcast course, how to be able to create, get your guests, scale it and monetize it. So please do go to abmpodcastcourse.co.uk and go into the contact us bit. I'm looking for new people to be able to be a podcast creator and really to be able to develop their skills and knowledge into a podcast. So as I said, go to abmpodcastcourse.co.uk and sign up. Thanks.
This is the Absolute Business Mindset podcast, created and hosted by Mark Hayward. I'm a corporate employee with an entrepreneurial mindset. This podcast will help and support you with new ideas about business. These are my thoughts, ideas, and comments. Today we have Mark Ridley, who is the founder of Transform Performance International. Hello, Mark. How are you?
I'm very well, Mark. Thank you. Yes, good to see you.
Yes, it's great to have you on the show. We're sort of coming out of COVID now. Often I do talk about COVID, but I'm interested from your point of view. You work with global companies, working with big brands. How has COVID actually affected you?
On a number of levels. Let's take the professional level first. It's been an interesting ride, and we're sort of partway through it. If we cast our minds back to the early part of March, I can well remember literally around the 18th, 19th of March, my colleague Ian, one of my co-founders, was in Nuremberg about to deliver a whole day face-to-face workshop, and the regional president walked in and said, "Everybody out, we're closed." And we'd literally done 30 minutes. And that was the start of it. And we were in the middle of a global delivery to one of our major clients this year, and we literally had to take all of that program, all of that learning that we'd prepared, and in 6 weeks turn it around and turn it into a virtual program, which we've just about finished delivering now. So yeah, it's been a roller coaster. In terms of how organizations have coped, I'm pretty impressed, actually. I'm very lucky. I've worked in over 60 countries in the last 20 years with a range of great brands, and maybe I see one side of business and one side of life where in the sense they have the resources, and I think when you have that scale, it perhaps, I don't wish to underestimate it, but perhaps it's easier to manage these situations. A large number of our clients, frankly, Mark, already operated in quite a virtual world.
Right.
We've been talking about how do I lead virtually, how do I sell virtually, manage virtually, how do I operate as part of a virtual team, and so on and so forth. We've been having these discussions probably since 2000, since we started the company. Yeah. I think what this situation has done, however, it is really focused minds. It's concentrated minds. If I think back to what happened after 9/11, when a lot of learning, a lot of meetings suddenly went online. And then I think back to what happened in 2008-9, when obviously we had the financial crisis. We went through moments where everybody said, yeah, let's go more virtual. Let's do things differently. I think this time they really do mean it. And I think that is the big change.
Yeah, and so I've had various conversations. I was interviewing someone last week who is a small business owner, and he has a whole of his team working remotely. Some are in the Philippines, some are in UK, some are in all sorts. He's based in the US, in different parts of the US. And he said to me that he thinks that virtual working will just become the norm. And I was thinking, so I currently work for a Big Four consultancy firm. I've handed in my notice. I'm going to be leaving on the 16th of October. But I've experienced a company, a big company, having to move very quickly to this remote working. And I don't think they were ready for it as a starting point. But I think that they're currently in, and I think a lot of these big organisations, and I read that, I think it's HSBC, forgive me if I get them wrong, HSBC have said that they don't want anyone to come back till 2021. I then read that Barclays are saying they'd like their people in as soon as it's safe. And then my company that I work for are saying that it really depends on what their clients want. So if their clients want face-to-face meetings, they'll more than likely be in the office. If they're happy with virtual, they'll stay virtual. Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to, when we come more and less restrictions are going to be on us, I think we're going to be in this sort of pivot point whether I think the smaller companies will stay remote because they're saving costs on offices and things. Larger companies might take, as always, they take a little bit longer to be able to move their pointer one way or the other. I think it'll be really interesting in the next year, 6 to 12 months, whether we do find whatever the new normal is. I'm not a great fan of that word, but whatever the new normal is actually is going to be back in the office, or whether a proportion of people will want to be in the office and the rest will still be working from home.
Well, it's very interesting because if you think about some of the companies that, again, let's not talk about their valuation and the value that they've added, but I'm thinking of places like WeWorks and all that kind of stuff. For a long time, they were sort of pushing this whole concept of, well, it's hot desking, it's remote working when you want it, but, we're here when you need it. I think their business model is under threat because I think so many of the large corporates that you've just mentioned will go to a similar model themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that is the way forward. I mean, I look at our own business. We are, small business based just outside Newbury in Berkshire.
Right.
And we have what we call the barn. So a few years ago, for a whole host of, personal and reasons, we basically, lifestyle reasons, we basically decided to base the business in the English countryside. Okay. But pretty close to Newbury, so you can be in and out of London and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I can see that we also, we're going to be using that office. Yes, it's going to be a hub, but it's not going to be the kind of hub that it was even 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And I was laughing with my colleagues the other day when one of my colleagues who manages all our logistics at the office said to us, "We're going to have to book time when we're going to be in the office." So that prep can be made, as opposed to we had to let people know when we weren't going to be in the office. I thought, talk about a 180.
Yeah.
I mean, how paradoxical is it that we end up saying, phoning up our employer, TPI, Transform Performance, is my employer after all, and say, by the way, I'm coming into the office. Can you prepare for me? I mean, it's bizarre, but I think that's the way it's going to be for a long time to come.
I totally agree. I think it's interesting times. I think the whole remote working is a fascinating area where, as you said, people have been doing this for 20 years or so. If you think of Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Work Week, I'm not sure what date that was, but that was probably 20 years ago. And he sort of talked of that.
Yes. Reminded me. Yeah.
Right, let's jump back. Let's jump onto your career. So let's go back to you did a degree at the University of Birmingham and history.
I did medieval and modern history. I do. Yes, I do. I how could I forget? I met my wife on the very first day of the course.
Oh, amazing!
How romantic is that? Yeah. And we're still married 35 years later.
Congratulations. So what made you choose the history degree?
Oh, very simple. It actually goes back to leadership that we touched on a moment ago. It was I was inspired. I think back to my school days, and I had a history teacher who made history come alive. History for me was never about remembering dates, although I'm pretty good at it, to the annoyance of my to annoyance of my business partners. But no, jumping around between desks, fighting the War of the 13 Colonies, or fighting the War of Jenkins' Ear, or whatever it might have been. My history teacher, Brian Davidson, bless him, made it come alive. And that is what inspired me to study hard, to emulate him, and to study history at university.
And so just to go a little bit further back, so your upbringing. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing. So so obviously you had a degree. You went to university. Was that an expectation from your family, or was that more you?
Oh, you betcha! You betcha! I am the child. I am the progeny of people who were in the education profession. My parents were both in the education profession. My grandmother was in the education profession. My father moved around the country for promotion during his career. So I'm originally from Newcastle upon Tyne. I was born a Geordie and still very proud of that. Still support Newcastle United for my sins. My father was from County Durham, an avid Sunderland supporter. So we had our moments, he and I. But he moved for promotion. So we gradually moved south and west, and my formative years were really spent in the southwest, near Torquay, a little town on the south coast of Devon called Teignmouth. And my parents, both taught. My mother in the primary sector, and Dad was the head of what was at that time the largest school in Exeter. So yes, it was expected, and indeed. I was at the Teignmouth Grammar School, and my father used to train some of the teachers there who were my teachers. And I'd get home and I'd discover that, Mrs. Shaw says you've been throwing things in biology and, etc. You know the kind of thing. It was really quite frustrating being the son of teachers.
So, but then after university, you went into sales, which is not necessarily. So it's a surprise with a history degree and with a sort of education background.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi, I'm Alex, the host of X Health Show, Meet the Future of Healthcare. Think X-Men, that's X Health. Actual superheroes behind programming living cells to cure cancer once and for all. Tech that detects preterm delivery in seconds, brain-computer interface, or apps that employ AI to match your disease with the best treatment. X Health Show brings to you visionaries who push the boundaries of healthcare from Switzerland, the heart of Europe, and the most innovative country in the world. Let me introduce you to their startups. Head to X Health Show, Meet the Future of Healthcare. Happy to greet you there.
When I graduated, the interesting thing is that back then, I can't talk for now, and God help me, I'm going back to 1983 when I graduated. The world was very different. Jobs were not easy to get, and anyone who's listening to this podcast who is thinking about, what's the future hold, at the risk of sounding like an old fuddy-duddy, a number of us have been here a few times before. If we're resilient, we will get through it. But jobs were not easy to find. And I actually fell into the world of retail. In my day, most historians became accountants.
Okay.
And the reason for that is, if you think about it, it's probably quite logical. With history, you're taught to be quite forensic. Mm-hmm. You're taught to be able to see both sides of an argument. Mm-hmm. Very useful if you're auditing somebody. You can see both trails, as it were. Yeah. You are taught an understanding of logic and rationale and facts, but you're also taught to be able to interpret and to make facts, in a sense, fit an argument, whereas numbers can do the same. So a lot of us fell into accountancy. I was not going to be one of those.
Okay.
And if the truth be told, I met an old friend standing on Exeter Station one day, and he worked for an insurance company, and he said, "Mark, why don't you come and work for us?" and I took a route of least resistance, and I fell into the world of sales and the world of financial services. And it's just one of those chance conversations where you meet somebody you know and they say, come on, give it a go. And I did, and I never looked back.
So we're going to talk a lot about sales, because I think sales, from doing research on you, I think sales is a sort of pivotal sort of framework of what a lot of the work that you've done at Transform Performance. But so you were in FS, you were in financial services, you were in tech, you were in retail. So you actually crossed many different industries, which I assume has helped you further down the line with your own business. But did you move for promotions? Did you move for different experiences? How did you sort of navigate yourself through the sales arena at that time?
No question. I moved for two reasons. One, I'll be quite frank. In those days, I was a lot younger. I was very utilitarian. In other words, we call that the utilitarian economic motivator. I genuinely wanted to rise rapidly and to be well rewarded for that. And that is a fact, and I'm proud of that, because it was a motivation. It doesn't motivate everybody, but it did me. So I was aware that I absolutely was. That was a driver. Equally, I am very curious. My wife will tell you, anybody who will listen, that I have the attention span of a gnat. And that's been one of my greatest talents, I think, and it's probably been my Achilles heel as well at times. That I do enjoy different things. I enjoy new experiences, and so on and so forth. So the ability to cross markets for me was, well, why wouldn't you? And again, some people would see that as a barrier. Well, you'd go for a job interview and people would say, well, you haven't worked in this sector, and you'd say, so. I've got transferable skills. And maybe the background of being a historian, they trained us well at Birmingham University to talk about our transferable skills into many marketplaces, and maybe that rubbed off. But I genuinely believe that to be true. If you're able to engage with people, if you're able to show an interest in others, what I call these days a degree of curiosity and relishing the unknown. If you're able to do that, you will probably survive wherever you end up, because you demonstrate that insatiable curiosity that I think stands people well. I think if you go in closed-minded, I know best, I did this in retail, therefore it will transfer to tech. No. It might be, I did this in retail, I wonder if it might transfer to tech. That's a different discussion. So I think as long as you keep yourself grounded, and as long as you keep yourself, I was going to say humble, maybe that's too much, but if you show due humility, maybe that's a better expression, I think you survive. And I hope I'm relatively living proof of that.
So this is going to be a loaded question. It's a two-part question. First part is, how has sales...
Oops. Oh, I lost you. Sorry, Mark. Sorry to interrupt. I lost you there. You froze and I didn't hear anything. Say that again for me.
How has sales changed throughout the years? So I doing some reading, and you were saying that a lot of automation has come into sales, where it was very much a telephone conversation that was driving it. But how would you say that sales has changed in through the decades?
Oh boy, massive subject, a whole range of areas. I think we've seen a dividing up of the kind of sales and an understanding of the kind of sales that people are involved in now. So frankly, when I started out in the mid-'80s, I think sales was, as a profession, it was nascent. So I don't think we fully understood the different nuances that different marketplaces might require. And, what do I mean by that? Well, you think of sales, and even to an extent in the UK, especially today, it's a dirty word. It still frustrates the hell out of me, by the way, that if you go to certain financial institutions, even today, you can't use the word sales when everybody knows that is exactly what high quality customer service means. It means selling people, matching people customers to the products that they need to have. And it drives me wild that the banks won't say, we have salespeople. Anyway, different discussion. Yeah, I'm getting off my high horse.
No, fine.
So I think there was a degree back then of simplicity in sales. I can remember, we all got trotted through the old, let's go on basic sales skills training. And, let's learn to ask questions. Let's learn to listen and objection handle. That's the one I hate more than anything. How dare you assume that customers are objecting just because they ask a question? Anyway, by the by. So anyway, there was that kind of mindset that we had. I think we've become far more sophisticated now, and I think we understand that in different markets, different talents are required. Yeah. The world is divided even into the world of pre-sales, and we've now got the whole idea of customer experience. And I think if there's one thing that we've moved through, I can see that we've gone on a bit of a sales journey. We moved into this whole idea of relationship selling. And then we moved into this idea of selling solutions, not throwing a product at somebody. And they're all very valuable. Then we moved into this idea that, well, actually, what customers want, and I still see that today, and rightly so. Customers, now they've got the internet, they can get information wherever they want it. They often know more about your product than you do. It's a bit like you said to me a minute ago, I've been researching what you've been writing about automation. And my brain was going, bloomin' heck, where did I write that? So the client often knows more than you do. And what clients want these days is insight. They want some thought leadership. And frankly, they want a degree of challenge, which I think is right, without arrogance. But I think the real difference now that we're noticing is the fact that, especially in many markets now, decision-making around purchase has many stakeholders involved, especially in business to business. But I think even in even in consumer marketplaces, my wife and I bought a new TV recently, and time was when maybe I might have gone along to, I don't know, some retail outfit, which might sound like an Indian restaurant on a Saturday night. I won't name names. And I would have a conversation. I'd walk out with a telly. No chance these days. I mean, these days you have to consult, your wife, you have to consult the kids. What kind of TV do we want? What size screen do we want? All this kind of stuff. It's become the buying decision these days is a wholly different game. And I think salespeople now have a harder job than they've ever had before. But I actually think if they follow it in the right professional way, they've got the most exciting job. It's far more exciting and interesting than when I started out.
So I agree. The buyers now are a lot more sophisticated. They've got a lot more knowledge, and they can do a bit of research and understand what's happening. But so I would agree with that. But how do you see now what the salesperson of the future will look like? So let's fast forward 10 years. How do you see the market change for a salesperson?
I think the big thing is that we're going to see, the blurring of lines between roles. I think as we get more sophisticated, a lot of our customers rightly now are focusing on what they will call customer success. And, I think the nature of engagement of customers or clients with businesses is going to change. So, are we going to have salespeople out there, the sort of like traditional sort of road warriors walking the streets, as it were? I'm not so sure it's going to be quite like that. I think we're going to have to be much more customer aware, much more integrated internally as an organization facing the customer. I mean, one of the perennial concerns I hear organizations say when they're dealing with sales forces is that, do you know what? It would be great to have a relationship with the people who sell to us. But the trouble is the only thing that unifies them is the logo that comes in on the invoice. Yeah. You deal with one function, you get one story, you deal with another. I mean, you say you've worked for the Big Four. I mean, I've heard, I also have I've had the big four as clients, and without singling them out, that would be unfair. But I've heard that leveled at them. A partner shows up at a pitch, and then in come the young graduates to deliver the project. Client does not get a consistent experience, and I think that kind of focus on the customer, thinking about what the customer is going to need out of this, is going to become so important that if we don't pay cognizance to that, people who don't will suffer.
And so for me, to do with sales, and in the big four, sales is a dirty word. You're not a salesman, you're a consultant. But actually, I found a strand of sales, the consultative sales technique or methodology, and I actually found that incredibly helpful in my role a few years ago when I was reading about this, because it's all about building relationships. It's all about finding common ground, and again, all the things you've talked about, finding people's problems, instead of throwing products at them, talk about their problems, and I found it really an enlightening experience, really, because I was then going into sort of decision-making meetings with buyers, and instead of sort of using sales techniques as in you must buy this product, just building up a rapport, building up a relationship with your client is just so important. And those relationships can last decades, because
Absolutely.
You build up a strong rapport with people, you stay in contact with them. They might be for a career move, they might be just for another, if you move somewhere else, you might be able to win them as a client. I just think, I think it's sad that in the UK that sales is deemed in some way slightly a derogatory term, because I think we all sell ourselves, we all sell our products, our services whenever we're in business, and people should just really just get over themselves.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, some people listening to this pod may well have Daniel Pink, and he wrote a book a few years ago called "To Sell Is Human." And when we published the Salesperson Secret Code a few years ago, we had a big debate, because we also realized that by calling it the Salesperson Secret Code, there was a severe danger that a lot of people would look at that and say, "Oh, well, I'm not a salesperson. Why would that be of use to me?" Without understanding that beneath the covers, what we are actually saying is exactly along the lines of what Daniel Pink said, which is that actually, it's not about anything other than that sense of identity that you have. And if you are a person who consults, like you say that you did, if you're a consultant, if you're a kind of person who wants to help, who wishes to challenge, who wishes to provide insight, all of those things make you a salesperson. And by the way, the next time you're trying to persuade your partner to buy that 65-inch TV at that shop that sounds like an Indian meal out, that's selling. We all do it every day. Yeah. And we, as you rightly say, we need to get over ourselves. It is true that certain people gave the industry a bad name, but you know what? There's bad apples in every barrel. And why should sales be singled out any more than, say, dare I say it, banking or tech or whatever it might be? I mean, this goes back to values, and it goes back to the belief systems that drive sound sales behaviors, and that's what I evangelize about. That's why I'm so passionate about talking about selling.
So let's talk about your business that you formed. You're a founding partner in 1999 of Transform Performance International. So tell me a little bit why you then thought that you wanted to be a business owner, and tell me a little bit about the business.
Okay, well, I'm smiling partly because there normally ought to be some sort of like Damascene moment, and I sort of had it. I worked for a tech company, a very successful tech company, and it was based in Cheltenham, and I was living in Hampshire. The consequence of that was that I was commuting literally from Hampshire up to Cheltenham every day of the week. Wow. And one day I got stopped by the sound of nee-naw, nee-naw, nee-naw behind me just outside Swindon. Anyone listening to this who knows Blunsdon Hill will know it well. And they got out and they said, did you realize that you were doing miles an hour in A50? And I said, really, Ossifer? I had no idea, Ossifer. Anyway, they kept me talking there. And what it made me realize was that what the hell was I doing? What on earth was I doing with my life? There I was, 35, 36, two young kids, sort of under 5, and there's me at sort of 6 a.m, legging it all the way from Hampshire up to Cheltenham, trying to get to a board meeting or whatever it was, and I'm thinking this has got to stop. So within a very few weeks, I had decided that I was gonna give that the big heave ho. So you asked me what it was that made me do it. Frankly, Mark, it was a realization that if I carried on the way I was, I probably wasn't going to see 45.
Okay.
That said, I had made great friends with a guy called Ian Mills, who we'd worked together in financial services. We'd even worked together in this same tech company. He'd left by then. And we decided that given where I was at and where he was at, why don't we give this a go? And of course, young Turks, fearless, all that kind of stuff. And then on the first day, we sat in his kitchen. I always remember this. We sat in his kitchen and I looked at him and I said, oh, fiddle. What are we going to do? 2 kids under 5, a wife who thinks that this is going to work. No clients. To which Ian, who I admire greatly and still do, said, don't be ridiculous. We're intelligent. We've got experience. We will be fine. And he was absolutely right.
How did you get your first client?
A little bit of luck.
Right.
But what was it Gary Player once said, the golfer, funny, the more I practice, the luckier I get.
Yeah. I think Michael Jordan, the Arsenal player. I've just watched the thing in Netflix with Michael Jordan, and he says something similar. You've got to be available to take the shot, or you won't get the basket. And it's a very similar.
That's exactly it. Well, one of the co-founders of our business, basically, there were 4 of us who started the business. And to cut a long story very short, we had an opportunity to work for a global computer company. We really didn't think that we would win the gig. But we somehow convinced them that we had scalability and were able to deliver all around the world. And so within about 4 months of us starting the business, you might remember the name Compaq Computers.
Yeah.
They became our first client. So we were, yes, lucky, but, as you say, we were available to take the shot.
Just interestingly, how did you persuade a global brand that 4 founders of a business were able to have? So what were you selling, sales techniques to them? Or
yes, we were. Yes, you're quite right. Let's just go back to basics and let's explain to your audience what the business was about. We had decided the focus of the business was going to be around, yes, business improvement, performance improvement, but the focus was going to be through people. And the reason for that was, again, this goes back to, what drives me now. You can have the best processes in the world. You can have the best product. You can have all of the best systems in place. But actually, in the end, if you don't have that people element right, you're in trouble. And whether we work in a virtual world or a face-to-face world, that is going to, I believe, continue to be a truth. So we actually called the business Transform People International. And indeed, if you were to look us up at Companies House now, you would see that the business, although we trade as Transform Performance, we're still called Transform People International. There's a little story behind that, but maybe later. So how did we convince the organization? It so happened, to your point, that what they were interested in, and a lot of businesses still are, was that they recognized that they had people who were very expert in what they sold and in what they were talking to customers about, but their ability to turn that into relationships that mattered, their ability to network through multiple layers of buying across the C-suite, as we easily call it these days, but increasingly to deal with functions like procurement and so on and so forth, all of those kind of things. That required a different skill, and I think that they trusted what we said about our approach, which at the time was, I think, a little avant-garde. And they also recognized, and I would urge anyone listening to this, never be fazed by the fact that you might be a relative minnow trying to talk to a large organization. Large organizations will ask you all the right questions. They'll say, "Can you scale?" That's the first thing. Well, what's a company like you based in Wiltshire? We weren't in Newbury in those days. Based in Wiltshire, how can you deliver on a global basis? To which the question is, well, show us the rollout program and we'll show you how we'll deliver. Because, with the best will in the world, they're never going to deliver a global program on the same day in all parts of the world. It just doesn't happen that way. But they will try and scare you into thinking that you can't possibly deliver this globally. Well, you can if you've got the right associates, if you're prepared to do a little bit of traveling, and so on and so forth. So if the will is there, then absolutely it's doable. So I would say to your listeners, never be afraid to go for that big pitch. But you have to be mindful of the fact that these questions are going to come your way. Things like, yes, scalability. What about liability insurance? When you're a global corporation, liability insurance takes on a different meaning from when you are dealing with maybe a firm down the road. So all these things have to be considered. But I would just say, believe that you can punch above your weight, and you will find that you do.
How many employees do you have at the moment?
At the moment, we are about 15 people, full-time employees.
And
we have been
4 founders.
Oh, that again, I lost you. You're doing the old evening glitch.
Apologies. The same 4 founders?
No. 2 of the founders who we started the business with were about 15 years older than we were.
Okay.
And they retired. And I now found myself literally at the same age as they were when we started the business, which is absolutely scary. I never thought it would happen. So, at the moment, we're going through a process of reinvigorating the business with the next generation, which I think is very important. So, at the moment, we're full-time employees in the UK, about 15 people. As I said, we have been bigger. But again, anybody thinking of growing the business, I would say absolutely do that if that's what you're going to do. But we always focused on using technology to help us work efficiently and smartly. We've always focused on using associates or business partners who have a particular expertise and in different parts of the world. So our associate network at the moment is probably running somewhere between 60 and 70. Okay. And we use them on a regular basis. So they're not direct employees, but they are trusted partners to our business.
Right, okay. So I'm going to take us out of this. So as I said to you before, I'm going to have a couple of curveball questions. Mm-hmm. Tell me about a few books that have helped you, whether in your business, in your career, in your personal development.
Well, one that is very dear to my heart, because do you remember when I said to you that we were sitting in my friend Ian's kitchen and I looked at him and said, "Oh, fiddle, where do we find some business?"
Yeah.
He looked back at me and said, "Mark, we have to have an ology. We have to have an approach. We're called Transform People International."
Yeah.
What ideas have you got? So I delved down into my bag and I brought out a book that I had been reading, and it was called NLP at Work by a lady called Sue Knight.
Okay, not heard of that.
Right. Well, NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming.
Oh,
Neuro-Linguistic
AI
Programming.
does that now, doesn't it?
Pardon?
AI, artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it's all become mainstream. Now, a lot of bad press around NLP for reasons I won't go into. But when it's used correctly and when people fully understand it, and a lot of people criticize NLP who don't really understand what it really means. But just to give a summary, what it really is saying is, look, there's a whole load of stuff goes on in our head, and we make constructs. And it's a little bit like I said to you a few minutes ago about people who are in small businesses not believing that they're worthy of dealing with big business. That's going on in their head. It's not true. It's just a truth that they've made for themselves. And therefore, that neuro, what's going on in the head, comes out in the way in which people talk, linguistic. Now, programming is about and this is where it got a bit of a bad name, because a lot of people think, oh, it's about turning people into robots. It's about programming people to say things in the right way. No, it's not. I always think NLP should be called NLR, Neuro-Linguistic Reprogramming. Because actually, if you understand what is going on in here, you can recognize your self-talk. You can recognize your limiting beliefs. You can pick up on the signs that other people give you. And as a coach, that's imperative. Or dare I say, as a salesman, that's even more important. And therefore, you can pick up on what is going on in the heads of people around the table. And then you can use that to come to a win-win outcome for all parties. So Sue Knight, bless her, had written this book. I think back then it was the second edition. I think she's now on her fourth edition. And she is, in my opinion, one of the foremost exponents of NLP. And eventually she became, she trained all of us in our business. We went through her programs, and frankly, I would consider Sue to be a friend these days. And indeed, in the latest research, the Leader's Secret Code, we actually profiled Sue's son, Major James Knight, who won the Military Cross for bravery in Iraq, a great leader. And I think a large element of what James is today comes from the kind of things that his mother inculcated him without him knowing it. So that was one of the most influential books, and I would urge anybody who is interested in understanding how to translate what goes on in here and turn that into something effective for yourself and for others. Read NLP at Work by Sue Knight.
Okay, wonderful. We will talk about you being an author as well in just 1 minute, but you talked about coaching. So, and you talked about beliefs and values, and I'm a coach as well. And I think understanding people's beliefs and values are incredibly important to be able to understand their, as you say, their limiting beliefs, their decision-making processes. So how do you inspire with your coaching? What's your sort of methodology about how you coach people, whether it's inside your business or whether you have external sort of people that you help as well?
Okay, a number of different ways. I think as a caveat, just before I jump in, I think I would say it really depends on who you're working with. When you're a coach, and you will know this then, Mark, you learn to read the person that you're working with and the way in which you can deal with them. Sometimes I think it's important to be to approach the coaching from a degree of empathy. Well, I'd say sometimes, always. It's important to empathize, but I think sometimes to be overtly empathetic is a good way, because I think that can help some people. Other times I think there are people who actually what they're really looking for is some sage advice, and therefore your style may be more, shall we say, mentoring. Yeah. And I think, I know there's a lot talked about in the world of coaching about, it's the coachee's problem and they got to make the solution for themselves and all that kind of stuff. And I believe in that, absolutely. But you know what? Sometimes, especially in the world of sales, just to say to the other party, pin back your lug holes, this is how it is. Yeah. This is why that is important, I think is equally good. But I think also sometimes, and it's an approach I quite like, is to be quite provocative. So, if I've got somebody who sits down and they say, I'll say, how are you? Oh, I'm not great. Well, why are you not great? Well, this has happened and that has happened and all that kind of stuff. And I might just sit there, in silence. And then I might eventually look at them and say, well, with an attitude like that, are you surprised? And just see what you get back. Yes, you're taking a risk. But I think when you ask me about what my coaching style is, and I learned this by attending some fantastic sessions over many occasions by a guy called Frank Farrelly. And again, if you've not heard of Frank, look him up. Bless his heart, he's no longer with us. He died a few years ago. But Frank is what you might call the father of provocative coaching. And back in the early 70s, in fact, the late 60s, he wrote the book on provocative therapy. And basically, what he always used to say was, look, if you as the coach are worried about how the other person is going to view you, you don't deserve to be coaching them, because there are times when you will have to take a risk, and you may run the risk of being misunderstood. You may run the risk of saying something which the other person does not like, but actually 6 months, 9 months, maybe even a year later, they may well look back and say, now I know what they were talking about. Now I know what they meant. Right. And I think in my practice, that is sometimes caused me hassle, because I think a lot of people who are in our world, often, especially when they're dealing in client programs, are often more worried about what the happy sheets say at the end of a session than actually provoking change. Yeah. And I'm afraid, I'd far rather face a situation where somebody said, well, that wasn't very good. I didn't get what I needed, but actually, damn fine, you've given them what they needed. That kind of thing I think is more important to me. So if you ask me about my style, I would say I think it's caring. I think it's I hope insightful, but I think a degree provocative.
And do you have a coach now?
Well, funny you should say that. I have a number of coaches. Okay. I use my colleagues constantly. So if I'm having a moment, I'll pick up the phone to my founding partner, Ian, and we will coach each other. The chairman of our business, I use a lot. He is a great guy, Louis Jordan, ex-vice chairman of Deloitte. Great guy, and again has different insights to give me. I had a coaching call only this afternoon with one of my former clients who used to work with Cisco and is nowadays a freelance coach. So I pick a range of people from different backgrounds, and I will. I'm a little bit of a leech when it comes to it, if I'm honest, Mark. Maybe if they hear this, they probably won't like me saying it, but there's nothing like free.
Know you far too well to worry about.
Well, there's nothing like free coaching, is there? So yeah, and somebody else that I really admire is a lady called Najat El Mahdi, who's one of my clients for a long time over in Qatar. So I use a number of different people, and I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't have a single coach at the moment. No,
that's absolutely fine. And did you earlier on in your career did you have because I think it's interesting. I've recently been asked to help someone. Well, I've had a conversation with him, and I'm really working through before started working with him, whether he needs a coach or a mentor. And I've sort of been, as you say, as a coach, you let the person make their decision and you sort of guide them. Actually, I think this guy actually needs a mentor, and he needs some actual guidance on how to get to where he wants to get to in 6, 12 months, whatever it is. So I think it's an interesting thing. Did you have a mentor earlier on in your career that sort of was that wise sage that sort of helped you along those sorts of stages?
Absolutely did. His name was John Murch. Do you remember I said I met somebody at Exeter Station and said, Why didn't you come? That was John. Right. And I'd known John since I was literally about 4 years old. He was actually a close personal friend of my parents. And he'd worked in the financial services industry all his career. And he had a wonderful, lackadaisical, and yet very professional view of the world, very old school. These days, you might even look at somebody like John and say they wouldn't survive, and probably wouldn't. I'm going back almost 40 years, God help me. So yeah, different times, different places. But yes, John was instrumental. And even when I left the organization that we're talking about, where we both worked, he encouraged me to go, actually, to spread my wings and to do different things. And yeah, I think everybody needs that. I'm sitting there, you've put me into it, and I'm just thinking, I'm just being aware of my state now. You're making me realize he was actually almost a father figure, really. And that's important, I think. So John was absolutely that. Unfortunately, my other mentor is no longer with us, but that was my father.
Right. Yeah. And I think you're right. People often men, but equally women as well. I think that's sort of an earlier. So one things I missed in my 20s was that mentor, that sort of wise sage to help me along. And this is one of the inspirations for me doing podcasts, is for people these days, having virtual mentors and virtual coaches is something, and podcasts and books and things are ways that people learn and develop skills and understanding. So I got envious that you had that in your early days, because that's something that was very lacking in my days until I hit my sort of 30s, late 20s, early 30s, that I found the right mentor to bring me through my career now I still work with him now into this entrepreneurial world.
The only thing I would say about that, though, is that don't give me too much credit, because I didn't appreciate what I had until it wasn't there anymore.
Yeah. That's.
So it's the benefit of a little bit of a few grey hairs. Yeah. So again, anybody younger listening to this,
appreciate, absolutely. Okay, so we were talking about books earlier on. So you are an author of 3 books. So tell me about them. You were just showing us about the salesperson secret code.
Yeah,
leader's secret code as well.
Yeah.
So what's that, was that because you wanted? I found it really interesting. Someone said to me, to be an author, you need to be an authority. That's where the words come from, which I'd not thought of. Mm-hmm. Did you want to be an authority by writing a book? What was your inspiration for writing?
All of that. Go back to the historian.
Right.
You can see the linkage.
Yeah.
I've always enjoyed writing. Now, let me be clear. The books that we've written are collaborative affairs. Okay, so yes, my name is on the book, but with the Salesperson Secret Code, I co-wrote that with Ian Mills, the co-founder of my business, one of my close friends, Dr. Ben Laker, who's professor of leadership these days at Henley Business School, and a guy called Tim Chapman, who is professor of sales at York University at the moment. But when I knew him and he was my client, he was headed up elements of Vodafone global sales. So, we were all steeped in the world of sales, and we all were part of it. For the Salesperson Secret Code, absolutely, I'd say I did the lion's share of the writing. And did I want to be an authority? I don't think it was. I don't think it was anything conscious, but I think it's true to say that since we have discussed it, you're probably aware that anything that's published in the UK, gets placed into the British Library. Right. So, one day somebody wandering along those carols or whatever they are in the library, like we had at university, might stumble across this. And when I'm pushing up the daisies somewhere, at least there is a bit of a legacy. And I fully admit there was a degree of that there. And
you should try and get a deal with getting it on a curriculum or something like that. Then you've got the additional that people wander through, and you get a bonus every year, every September.
Yes. Yes, the late Mark Ridley. Yeah. Anyway, so yes, there was an element of that, but in actual fact, it's interesting because it goes back to the passion. One of the first book we wrote was called 100 Big Ideas to Help You Succeed, and that was a wholly different kind of approach. What we wanted there was to provide quick and easy reference to some of the simple ideas that we'd learned in years of selling ourselves. It wasn't just selling, but little pointers to successful business. So that's what the 100 Big Ideas were about. And if you open it, it literally is 100 pages because it's one idea per page. And I tell you, it was almost as difficult writing a book where you had to synthesize a complex idea into 2 paragraphs than it was to write something of that thickness. Yeah. Because there's no room for error. There's no margin for waffle and all that kind of stuff. Mm. So we wrote that, and that was great, and it sold very well, and to our surprise, continues to do so. So I was saying the other day, it's about time we sort of modernized that one because that was published in 2013, and it's due a bit of a revamp. But actually in 2015, 2016, we decided that we wanted to write something a little bit weightier, and that's where the salesperson secret code comes from. And in actual fact, Mark, it goes back to the discussion we started with earlier this evening. This goes back to our belief, and it is a belief, an emotionally held opinion, that sales and salespeople get a bad press. Some of it self-inflicted, admittedly, but that why is it that organizations up and down the land, right across the globe, seem to invest a fortune in sales processes, in sales tools, in sales methodologies, yada, 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 and nothing really seems to change? And this frustrated us because for so long, we'd been asked to go in there and do some sales training. And we'd say, yes, but unless you make it part of a system and you understand and you explain to people why they're doing this and how it connects with their vision of themselves and why this matters to the organization, it's not going to happen. Dare I say it, look at the number of organizations that have implemented fancy customer relationship management systems. And the salespeople fight it tooth and nail. They fight it not because they're lights. They fight it because they don't really understand why they're being asked to do it. They don't get the connection to them and their world and the linkage to what I call a line of sight with the vision of the organization. And this is why we decided to investigate the belief systems, because I hold a view that if you go back to first principles, training of sales forces focuses on behavior and skill. Right. Actually, that behavior or that skill is only going to get used or displayed if somebody believes in the importance of it. Mm-hmm. And unless you believe in it, it's never going to happen. Mm-hmm. So a belief, basically causes a behavior, and that's what we become. That's what people receive. If I believe it's important to treat my customers with dignity and with respect, that's the way I will behave, and that's what the customers will experience. If I believe that my customers are suckers ready to buy my latest product, that's how I will behave, and that's what they will receive. And that was the background to the salesperson secret code. What are the beliefs that drive the top performers?
So what's your view on the sort of blurring line between sales and marketing?
No, males and sarketing. Yes. Well, that goes back to what we talked about before, the role of the salesperson. I can absolutely see that the way in which marketing is now working, where we are talking much more about customer journeys and nurturing, and salespeople, I think, will need to learn to sort of come into focus with customers at certain points in that nurturing journey, and then maybe go out of focus again, and maybe come back into focus. And in order to do that properly, they're going to have to work very closely with the marketing function. And I don't know what you think, but this sort of antiquated view that marketing is the business prevention department that stops sales doing what it wants to do, and that marketing department thinks that if only those idiots in sales could could communicate what it is we've got to sell, the world would be a better place. I'm afraid these guys have got to really come together in a lot more than perhaps they are at the moment.
So my view is that they complement each other and should complement each other. And I think as an idea, they might be separate teams, but I think more and more we're finding that marketers are, as you say, that are creating a journey or creating an imagery of a brand or a concept or a service or a product. And actually, if that branding, if that message was given to the salespeople and the salespeople were using that message part of their sales techniques, then you've got something which is amazing for a company. You've got actually two parts of the business in synergy, and there's a consistency across. So if you're talking to sales, if you're talking to marketing, or you're talking to account managers or whatever they are, if they're using the same language, they're using the same ideas, the same branding, I think that's where the best companies are working so much harder to get them both working together.
I couldn't agree more. I look back at my career, and I remember, that you said my mentor said to me when I left the organization we worked with, he said, Mark, go and get a professional qualification. And I actually went off, and my new employer sponsored me to do my chartered marketing exams.
Okay.
So although I have a sales background, I actually am a chartered marketer, and I've always been grateful for that synergy. So yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. I think the way in which customers purchase now, the way in which customers gather insight and information, the line is so blurred. And I think that if in sales we don't see ourselves as part of marketing, and if marketing we don't see ourselves as part of sales, we're actually doing the customer a disservice, because customers, we have to persuade customers that not only do they like what they've just bought from us, but they're getting value from what they've just bought from us. Oh, and by the way, if they get value from what we've just bought from us, perhaps they're then open to discussing something else that we might have to offer. Mm-hmm. If it breaks down at that, well, I'm not deriving value from what you've just offered me or what you've given me, you're not going to get that next conversation. So you can market at them until you're blue in the face, but the experience isn't with the marketing blurb. So I think it's absolutely critical that if we're going to create this sort of virtuous circle of customer journeys and customer success, that marketing and sales, and in fact every department, is focused on what is the customer experience.
Yeah,
critical.
Totally agree. So part of what you sell and how you coach is about leadership. So what does leadership mean to you as a concept? Whether you're talking about your own leadership as being a business owner, or equally teaching how to be better leaders, or
Well, in the research that we've done around the Leader's Secret Code, which was published at the beginning of December last year, available from all good booksellers, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. What we identified there were 7 core beliefs around leadership and the way in which leaders work. Now, let's be clear. Although we talk about 7 core beliefs, beneath each of those core 7 beliefs were what we call sub-beliefs. And actually, there are 14 sub-beliefs. And if you were to read the book, what you would discover is that it's not a question of either or one or the other, or one is good and one is bad. Far from it. What the research absolutely demonstrated was that the most successful leaders, the quartile 1 leaders that were used in our survey of over 1,000 leaders across 17 countries and 11 different vertical markets, what it absolutely showed was that the good leaders understand the importance of a range of different behaviors. And it's the balance of these behaviors in their situation that makes for success. Let me give you an example. One of the beliefs we explore, 7 beliefs, destination beliefs we call them, because these 7 beliefs drive every leader, was around feelings of control, beliefs around control. And when we talk about control, what we're really saying in the context of the Leader's Secret Code, when we were researching it, what we realized was that a lot of people viewed leadership around the fact that if I'm going to be a leader, I am accountable for the success of my people, and I'm accountable for my own success. And that is what we meant by this overarching vision of being in control. But how the leaders achieved that accountability differed. And so it divided into those who felt that it was important to be more directive, and those who believed it was more important to be participative. Now, it's not either or, it's the balance. That's what the secret code is. And if you want to know what the code is, well, you have to read the book. But here's a challenge that I would lay out to anybody who's listening to this podcast now, who might be in an emerging leader position or who is in a leadership position. If you agree that control is important, that someone or something has to be accountable for the success, whatever that success might be, ask yourself this question: to what extent do you drive towards that control and that success by being directive, conducting from the front, if you like? And to what extent do you believe in allowing others to shape that direction of travel? Now, the secret code was in that sweet spot, the balance that the scores of the top quartile leaders gave us when they answered all our survey questions. It doesn't make them all right. It just means that what we've done is identify a benchmark for leadership. So I would say, if you're asking me what leadership is about, it comes down to emotional intelligence. It comes down to that ability to be self-aware, to be situationally aware, and to flex according to the needs of that moment. Not to be a pushover, not to flex so far that you let go of your principles and your integrity, but to recognize that sometimes, you're in an environment where being directive is important. If there's a fire to fight and there's a crisis and there are people at risk, in that moment you're going to have to be quite directive.
Do you think there's leadership styles? Do you think people are more prone to being more directive or authoritarian? Or I did a podcast probably about a year ago, which was about 7 different types of leadership styles. Now I think there's 20. I think there's 20 or 25. There's loads and loads and loads.
Yep.
Do you think being a leader, you need that directive and sort of empower people as well? Or do you think it's what industry you're in makes a remarkable difference, whether you're directive or you're sort of collaborative in your leadership style? Do you think it matters?
Well, it's interesting. I think it does have an effect, and certainly what we discovered in the leadership research was that you've got to be very careful, because leadership is so nuanced and so situational. However, the fact that we were able to produce a leader's secret code would indicate that there is a common thread that runs throughout successful leaders. And remember, what we discovered was that although we'd gone out and researched and interviewed 1,000 people around the world in, as I say, 17 countries and 11 different industries, and that was just to get the book published. That was just to do the research. We're ongoing. What was interesting was when we analysed the responses to a whole range of questionnaires, actually 85% of the responses came within quite a narrow band. Now, normally you might look at that data and say, well, what is that telling you? But actually, when we worked through the data, we worked it through with my colleague Ben, Professor of Leadership, and Adam Pacifico, who is also one of the co-authors. When we looked at that data, what it brought home to us was that it actually didn't matter which industry you were in. It didn't matter where you were in the world. Actually, quartile 1 leaders tended to coalesce around a view which was exactly as you say. It was about this nuanced balance of these different beliefs, which drove their behavior. So what I can tell you, for example, that let's assume we were allocating 20 points towards this idea around control. I can tell you now that 8 points were awarded by top quartile leaders on average to being directive, and 12 points were were allocated to being participative. Okay. So what the leaders were clearly saying is that they believed in being directive, but they believed in being participative 50% more.
Right.
But anybody listening to this or who's interested in leadership should not think it's one or the other. Oh, I'm a participative leader, therefore being directive is anathema. That is not what we're saying. What we've actually discovered is there is a degree to which being directive is effective and a degree to which being participative is effective. We found a benchmark, but don't make them mutually exclusive.
So do you think you need to have that in your repertoire? So it sounds like you need to have in your repertoire a directive sort of part of your personality to actually be a successful leader.
Yes. Or if you don't have that, and if you come out of, you might do our survey at some point down the line, and you might discover that you are intensely, you believe intensely. There could be people listening to this podcast now and say, well, it's important. I'm absolutely passionate about being participative, and my team takes part in everything. Well, that's great. But you may well find that you're holding that belief in a little more intense way than the majority of successful leaders are.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we'd be encouraging you to do is to think about dialing that down and saying, and again, back to my provocative style, come on, could you just be a little more directive at times? There are people out there who actually would thrive on that certainty.
It was interesting. I was talking to someone who I was sort of doing a little bit of side coaching as a friend, and we were just talking about things, and he was told that he was not directive enough. He was not you have to, now this is definitely more extreme than what you're saying, but you need to be able to kick people's butts, you need to be able to shout at people to show that you're the leader, and it just wasn't part of his makeup. And I said to him, I'd like to know your thoughts on this. I said to him, it would be good if you then were courageous, or you stood for something. Therefore, you don't have to be someone shouting at you, you've not done that right. But actually, that's another way of being able to be directive, is actually stand for something, whether it's something business, soft skills, whatever it is, but actually stand for something, and people will follow you there as well.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. I mean, when somebody gets the feedback, you need to be able to, as the Americans might say, kick ass. Yeah. That's a belief.
Yeah.
That's a bit of feedback. It doesn't make it true. And I would take that. But maybe what that person was trying to say, if I believe that person had the best of intention, they were probably trying to say, look, on occasion, maybe you're taken advantage of. So you're right. Was it clear what that person really stood for and what was important to them? Did they give the impression that they tended to bend with the wind simply because that was the way the wind was blowing, and not because they were prepared to turn into the wind and face things down? I absolutely agree. I think you have to know as a leader what battles you're prepared to fight and why you're fighting them. Yeah. And I think you have to know also equally which battles you will allow others to win. Yeah. Because everybody, needs their little victories. But I come back to this F word, flex. I go back to the original book on NLP by Sue Knight, and Sue writes in that book that if you are going to influence others, influence starts with being flexible, and she encourages the reader to think about the fact that the person who displays the greatest flexibility in the way they think and the way they behave, in the end, is likely to have the greatest influence.
Right.
And I do believe that. I really do. That it's a belief. It's my truth, but it's a belief.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I don't want to take up all of your evening. I have taken up a lot of your evening already. So at the end of my podcast, I ask 6 quick fire questions. They don't need quick fire answers. One of them we've already probably touched on quite heavily, but I'll ask it anyway. The first question is, what's the best decision that you made?
To go self-employed and start my own business.
Good. What's the best piece of advice you were given?
Accept feedback graciously, and don't try and belittle it by saying, "Oh, it was nothing."
Okay. This is one I think we've touched on a couple of times. Who helped you most in your career?
John Murch, I've already mentioned, and then I would say absolutely my friend and colleague Ian Mills.
Awesome. Do you have any regrets?
Je ne regrette rien.
Excuse me?
No regrets. No, you know what? No. Different choices, perhaps. No regrets. It's been a blast, and it still is.
What are you most proud of?
My kids.
Good answer. And the last one is, what does legacy mean to you? The book in the British Library.
Yeah, sort of, really, yeah. I can't say more than that. Yeah. I mean, legacy might mean something I'm left in a will, but no, it absolutely means. You know what? We're here for such a short space of time, and God knows, when you get to my end of life, when you start to lose close relatives, and it becomes a bit of an alarming regularity, you begin to realize that you have to make the most of every day. You have to be thankful for everything you have. We all want to leave our mark in some way, shape, or form. And my legacy, I mean, I'm joking about that, but my legacy is my kids, my grandkids. But one day somebody might come across these books in the library and blow the dust off them and say, do you know what? This guy was talking some sense all those years ago. Why not?
And I think you mentioned also earlier, not trying to put words into your mouth, but trying to find leaders in your business now, thinking about the next generation of people that are going to take your business forward. I think that's also a legacy. To have 100-year company would be a fantastic legacy.
You know what? So you hadn't in those terms, but I think that's probably I know now you mentioned it. What is driving us? Yes, I would hate the thought of transform performance, aka transform people, disappearing simply because I decided to hang up my boots. We stand for more than that. We have more intellectual property than that. We've worked in over 60 countries with some great brands. Why would I want that to stop? I think you're absolutely right. Ford didn't start making cars just because Henry Ford got a bit old.
Absolutely. All right. Where can people find you? Where's the best place for if people have questions or want to find out more about you or your business?
Well, I'm a big LinkedIn fan. So find me on LinkedIn. Absolutely. Transformperformance.com is the website, and on there is a page where you can absolutely send an inquiry or info at or whatever it might be. I'm on Twitter. I'm at Mark Ridley _TPI. So find me there. Although I don't tend to twit as much as tweet as much as these days. I've sort of lost patience with that little medium. I much prefer LinkedIn.
I'm very big on LinkedIn. Actually, I've done something interesting in this last week. I've actually deleted Instagram completely off my phone. I've found I was just wasting so much time, and as I'm going to be starting sort of businesses already, but continuing my sort of entrepreneurial vision, I just took it completely out. So I understand what you mean about Twitter. I don't use Twitter that much either, but it's been an amazing experience just to delete Instagram and not have that sort of junk on your phone and just being a consumer. This is why I like LinkedIn. I like being a participant. I like using it for a purpose rather than what my experience with Instagram, which was just.
Well, I confess I've never had Instagram. I'm not even on Facebook.
Okay. Well,
so yeah.
Lovely.
What does that say about me?
You're outside of the 2 billion that do use Facebook, but
and that's one of the reasons why I won't.
Yes. All right, Mark. Thank you so much for your time this evening. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you.
I've really enjoyed meeting you, Mark. Thanks so much.
Yes.